Can I do a point of order before you start? I'd like to start with my opening remarks, and then afterwards you can. No, we have. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 83 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to the order of reference Tuesday, October 17, 2023, and the adopted motion of Wednesday, December 13, 2023. The committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments on the benefits of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although the room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is when an earpiece is worn too close to the microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone in which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. With us today for the first hour, we have Mr. Scott Tessier, CEO of Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board. We also have from the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, Barbara Pike, Chair of the Board. We also have Christine Bonnell-Esnor, Chief Executive Officer, all by video conference. We'll now begin with opening statements, but prior to doing so, I just have a point of order by Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk, on the point of order, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's just a very brief point of order. I was wondering, we're well into the study of C-49, and we have yet to receive a witness list of witnesses that will be attending committee or providing testimony here. And so can you Can you tell us when that is it available? Can we have it now or?
Thank you, Mr. Falk. We have been preparing the meeting schedule for the upcoming few weeks, and as you know, this committee did approve a travel request last week, which was sent to our liaison committee and then to the House for further approval. So regarding scheduling of witnesses, we will make sure that that is all coordinating, but we will provide you upon discussing with the clerk that information, whether it's today or tomorrow, as soon as we can get it out to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Chair, but I wasn't asking for a schedule at this time. I just want a list of the witnesses that will be coming and presenting here at committee.
We'll work with the clerk to get that out to all members.
And I have one more question. Can you change one of the screens so that we have our witnesses on at least one of them?
Kind of like this screen here.
Oh, okay.
Typically, one of the screens has witnesses.
Mr. Falk, thank you for that. Once the speakers begin speaking, that should occur because you have spoken, you're highlighted. But we will make sure that
usually one of the screens has all the witnesses.
We'll have our technology folks make that happen.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
So that list will be coming today then?
I'll confer with the clerk today or possibly tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Okay, we now begin with opening statements. Mr. Tessier, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon. As per the chair, my name is Scott Tessier and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, also known as the CNL-OPB. I have served in this role since 2013. Thank you for inviting me and for accommodating my virtual participation. I would have preferred to have been with you in person, but the local weather has complicated travel plans. On that note, I wish my colleagues and all the people of Nova Scotia and others affected by this weekend's storm a safe recovery. Newfoundland and Labrador is located in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and I acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit. 10 days from now will be the anniversary of the Ocean Ranger disaster. 42 years ago, the Ocean Ranger capsized during a severe winter storm, resulting in 84 lives lost. This terrible tragedy and 2 helicopter crashes in later years are deeply embedded in the culture of the CNLOPB. The safety of offshore workers is paramount in all that we do. Those lost, their families, and loved ones are forever in our hearts and our thoughts. I was able to be in Ottawa when Bill C-49 was introduced last year, and I am pleased to share with you our preparations for the regulation of offshore renewable energy projects. Our staff and our board are very excited about the proposed expansion of our mandate. We are working closely with our international counterparts in several venues, including the International Regulators Forum, the International Offshore Environmental Petroleum Regulators Forum, the International Upstream Forum, the North Sea Offshore Authorities Forum, and the Global Offshore Wind Regulators Forum. Offshore regulators in Australia, Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, the United Kingdom, the United States, and many other countries are undergoing the same expansion of their mandate as is proposed for ours under Bill C-49, from petroleum to energy. We are fortunate to have strong working relationships with our international counterparts, so we are able to share lessons learned and best practices in renewable energy with one another, as we have done for many years in the regulation of oil and gas. We're also working closely with the CNSOPB and other Canadian regulators and learning from the Newfoundland and Labrador provincial government's recent experience with onshore wind project selection. We are engaging with other Canadian entities, such as the Ocean Supercluster, Energy NL, Marine Renewables Canada, and fisheries stakeholders. We are providing policy and regulatory advice to the federal government and the government of Newfoundland and Labrador on land tenure and other considerations. We have been consulted throughout the development of the Atlantic Accord Implementation Act amendments, and we continue to be engaged in the details of the regulatory framework as they are developed. We are supporting the work of the committee, leading the regional assessment of offshore wind development for Newfoundland and Labrador, and we are available to them as a technical resource whenever and wherever requested. We are building renewable energy into our internal work planning and our training plans, and we are prepared to rebrand to the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Energy Regulator. I was fortunate to participate in a fact-finding mission to Germany focused on offshore wind energy last summer. The challenges of energy security and the energy transition and the opportunities of renewable energy were on clear display, along with the importance of openness, collaboration, and effective marine spatial planning. For close to 40 years, the CNLOPB has provided world-class regulatory oversight of the oil and gas industry in the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador offshore area, with a mandate that includes safety, environmental protection, resource management, and industrial benefits. We stand ready for offshore renewable energy projects. Our experience and technical excellence and our collaborative and transparent approach are transferable to the offshore renewable energy sector. We support Bill C-49, which is instrumental to an orderly energy transition through joint management and the futures of Newfoundland and Labrador and the rest of Canada. Thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tessier, for your opening statement. We'll now go to Christine Bonnell-Esner for a 5-minute opening statement. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Christine Bonnell-Esner, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. I am located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you for this invitation to come and speak to you today about Bill C-49, which outlines the Accord Act amendments required for the expansion of our
Question de règlement. Malheureusement, c'est pas possible pour les interprètes de faire leur travail. La qualité du son de Madame n'est pas suffisante.
I'm sorry, the interpreters are not able to interpret because the sound quality is not sufficient. Thank you.
Bonnell Esner, can you just hold for a moment and while we can check with our interpreters? Okay. We will suspend for a few moments. Welcome back. Apologies for the delay. Please go ahead, Ms. Bonnell Esner, with your 5-minute opening statement.
Perfect. Hello. My name is Christine Bonnell Eisner, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. I am located in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today about Bill C-49, which outlines the Accord Act amendments required for the expansion of our mandate to include the regulation of offshore renewable energy. We support these amendments and are actively preparing for the completion of the bill and becoming the Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator. The Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board is the independent joint agency created by the governments of Canada and Nova Scotia. Federally, we work with Natural Resources Canada and provincially with the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. We have more than 30 years of experience regulating offshore oil and gas exploration and development activities in the Canada Nova Scotia offshore area. We are the lead regulator and oversee all activities through the life cycle of an offshore oil or gas project, from exploration through development and finally to abandonment. We do this by recognizing that safety and environmental protection are paramount, and we make sure the operators who work in our offshore area do too. When it comes to any offshore oil and gas activity that an operator proposes to conduct in the Canada Nova Scotia offshore area, we go to great lengths to ensure that the regulatory requirements are met before granting an authorization that would allow activities to commence. We implement effective monitoring programs to confirm that operators comply with these requirements during the execution of a program. We ensure compliance with the legislated requirements so that exploration and development of our offshore resources are completed in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. We will do the same for offshore wind and other offshore renewable energy activities. Leveraging the similarities and managing the differences between oil and gas and offshore wind is critical to the success of delivering on an expanded mandate to regulate the broader energy industry in our offshore area. There are similarities in the geotechnical studies and the assessment of mid-ocean conditions, the approach to risk management, environmental considerations, and the need to coexist with indigenous communities, fisheries, and other industries and ocean users. The majority of what we do is directly transferable to offshore wind. We recognize that each section of the ocean is unique and each project is unique. The Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board has the technical and regulatory experience and expertise necessary to regulate offshore renewable energy. We are committed to continuous improvement and invest in the building and maintaining the technical competencies and expertise of our staff through training programs offered locally and globally. We work closely and are in regular contact with the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, the Canada Energy Regulator, other government departments, and international regulators, and continue to learn from our regulatory peers, including those who are already regulating offshore wind. As we have for the past 30 years, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board will continue to work with Indigenous communities, fishers, and other stakeholders to provide information about our regulatory role and to understand their unique and specific insights that should be taken into consideration prior to making decisions. This remains a commitment as we transition to become the lead and life cycle regulator of the offshore energy industry in the Canada-Nova Scotia offshore area. The Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board is committed, and we will be ready to be the lead regulatory agency and deliver on this new expanded mandate. We are trusted and recognized for the high standards to which we hold the oil and gas industry accountable, and will continue to deliver regulatory excellence as our mandate is expanded to include offshore renewable energy. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now proceed to the first round of questions. I will be using these two cards. Yellow means 30 seconds, and red is time's up. We'll start with Mr. Small from the Conservative Party of Canada for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Small. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for taking part in this very important study of this legislation, Bill C-49, which amends our Atlantic Accord. So, Mr. Chair, I'll speak to Mr. Tessier, and I have a couple of questions. Mr. Tessier, this is a very exciting time for our province and for your board, and I know that with yourself and with the CNLOPB, we're in very good hands as you work to maintain Canada's excellent safety and environmental record in the offshore energy industry. I understand that you attend the International Regulators Forum. How often does that take place, Mr. Tessier?
I thank the member for the question through you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the kind words, as for sure our staff and our board would. The International Regulators Forum is a collective of 11 countries, the offshore regulators, and they meet at a minimum annually. And we typically have a mid-year meeting on the margins of the Offshore Technology Conference in Houston. And we meet virtually as required and to conduct the business of various working groups under that forum.
Well, Mr. Tessier, how important is stability and certainty of regulations worldwide? What's been your experience in that respect?
I think both regulators and industry participants would universally agree and unanimously agree that stability and certainty are of paramount importance.
So, in a case like where licenses were cancelled off Stable Island in November after being awarded in October for exploration, what kind of message do you think that might send to those who want to invest in exploration in Canada's offshore?
I'm going to assume that one was for me as well. That one is outside my purview. That's in the remit of the Nova Scotia regulator and the province and the federal government.
Well, we'll get back to that one after then. Okay. So you were the head of the board in 2013, so obviously in 14, 15, 16 as well. Back in around 2015 and 16, what kind of money was invested in placing bonds on parcels that were offered up in Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore? And what would be the typical number of parcels that would be offered up?
I think members would be aware that there were some significant bids from the 2015-2016 period, including record bids in, I believe it was 2016. I stand to be corrected on that. The investment in our licensing rounds varies. It ebbs and flows with global industry conditions, money available for exploration, and the activities of local operators and potential new entrants. So it can vary widely from year to year.
So in 2023, we had, I think it was 37 parcels offered up. Would you consider that to be average or above average in terms of parcels offered up?
There were 47 parcels on offer in 2023, and there were 0 bids received. So that was the most we've offered in terms of acreage.
Most offered, and no bids. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So how much would a typical exploration company spend on purchasing data and on their personnel and whatnot in the process of placing a bid? Do you have a ballpark, a range of what those exploration companies would invest under one of those scenarios?
I don't know if I could give a typical number. I mean, it would be in the millions of dollars, but it would vary widely depending on the parcel offered, the experience of the company, whether or not they've worked here before, and exactly what their program is for data acquisition. So it could be a wide range. So
would you say that stability of regulation would be a factor when a company is investing in their personnel, their time and their energy and precious resources? Do you think stability of regulations would be a factor in them putting the time and energy into creating a bid?
It would certainly be one of several factors, yes.
Thank you. So do you know how many companies had purchased data to put in a bid in the first half, say, of 2023?
I'm not sure I follow the question, Mr. Chair. There were no bids received, so I'm not sure what sort of data acquisition went on behind the scenes. We wouldn't necessarily be privy to that.
So, could it be possible that no bids were made as a result of Section 56 in C49? It's referenced in item G in the bill summary. I'll just read from the bill summary just to make it simple. So, provide that the Governing Council may make regulations to prohibit the commencement or continuation of petroleum resource or renewable energy activities, or the issuance of interest in respect of any portion of the offshore area that is located in an area that has been or may be identified as an area for environmental or wildlife conservation or protection.
Mr. Small, time is up. And Mr. Tessier, brief answer, please. And if you need further clarification, it can be asked at a later time. But go ahead, Mr. Tessier.
Yeah, the reasons why a company may or may not bid are as varied as the companies themselves. I can tell members that in my discussions with operators in our offshore area, I have not heard Bill C-49 referenced as a reason why they did not bid.
Thank you, Mr. Tessier. We'll now go to Ms. Jones from the Liberal Party of Canada for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank our witnesses that are here with us today and acknowledge the tremendous work that you've done both in Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland and Labrador in building a very stable energy market for investors and creating jobs, strengthening the economy. And I'm very pleased to hear today as well that you're supporting Bill C-49 because as a lead regulator in both these provinces, it is so important to have an independent agency like yourselves that is looking objectively at this legislation to ensure it's strong and effective for the provinces that it affects. So we know how critical your role is in delivering offshore wind projects in Atlantic Canada. So I think my colleague opposite was trying to establish that because of Bill C-49, there's been no bids in the offshore oil and gas. Well, I remember many years of parcels being called for bid in Labrador with no bidders. So, and it happened long before this past year. So, and it happened for many different reasons, as we know. So I'm glad that you were able to clear that up. So my questions today is really around the regulatory piece and the safety and protection of workers. Always in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have fearless employees and skilled workers who work in the offshore oil industry, the offshore fishing industry, and have spent most of their lives on the ocean in one capacity or another. So my question to both of you is, when you look at what we're doing under C-49 in offshore wind, are you comfortable that we can ensure the safety and the protection of these workers in the offshore, and that we're able to meet the future mandates that have been established for energy development under this Act? And I think those are very important questions as we move forward with the bill.
Thank you for the question. So with respect to transitioning with an expanded mandate and still being the regulator for oil and gas, and as well the regulator for the offshore renewable energy industry, and primarily right now that's looking to be the first type of offshore renewable energy will be offshore wind. The governments write the legislation and the regulatory regime which we administer on their behalf. So when you look at occupational health and safety, which is very important because part of our mandate, an important part of our mandate is worker safety. Section Part 3.1, so the occupational health and safety requirements for any type of activity that occurs offshore will be the exact same requirements or almost identical requirements for offshore renewable energy. So a primary and an important part of our mandate is the safety of offshore workers, operations, and protection of the environment. And those important parts of our mandate will remain when we are the regulator for the offshore renewable energy industry.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that at all, Mr. Tessier?
I would add that in our engagement with our counterparts from around the world, what we're seeing and hearing from them, and some of them are further ahead of us in terms of the expansion of their mandate, the skill set for the regulation of offshore safety is very transferable from the petroleum sector to offshore renewable energy. So we're in good standing in terms of our preparedness and readiness to take on the expanded mandate.
My next question is around a consultation process that your boards would conduct. You talked about consulting with fisheries and Indigenous people in those areas and other stakeholders as well. Obviously, we know how critical it is that we have a strong, sustainable fishery in Atlantic Canada as well. Can you walk us through what would be the involvement and the process of the CNLOPB or the CNS OPB in sanctioning alternate energy programs for the offshore?
So I can begin. With respect to Bill C-49, the consultation is being led by the Government of Canada and the two provincial governments. The regulators are not leading on those consultations. We do have extensive experience in engagement with fishery stakeholders in the petroleum space, and we are aware that there are concerns held by various interests in the fishery sector with respect to the expansion of activity in the ocean. And we're very committed to working very closely with fishery stakeholders and Indigenous groups to ensure that there is effective communication, transparency, and cooperation, both in planning and on the water.
Okay, would you like to respond as well, Ms. Bunnell?
Sure. So in addition to what Scott said, which I'm in agreement with, we also have an example that I can speak to. So we have a long-standing fisheries advisory committee. So engagement with the fishers and Indigenous groups are very important to us. We've been doing it as we've regulated petroleum and oil and gas activity, and we'll continue to build on those strong relationships we have, because Indigenous groups and the fishers have very unique insight and information that we need to understand when we're making our decisions. So for our Fisheries Advisory Committee, that includes over 30 fishing groups that fish in the Canada-Nova Scotia offshore area. We meet with them a few times a year, and we've been meeting with them a lot more because they're interested to learn about what this future industry looks like. So we facilitate conversations that they can have with governments, and we look forward to future engagement with these groups.
Your boat energy regulate.
Ms. Jones, time's up, so save that for the next round. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your answers. We'll now move to Monsieur Simard from the Bloc Québécois for 6 minutes.
J'aurais bien laissé mon temps.
I certainly would have left my time for Yvonne, but because I like what her questions are, but I'm going to ask my questions myself because it really pertains to where I live as well. Very quickly, Mr. Tessier. I wonder if the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board has any expertise in wind energy. Is there anyone in your outfit that has carried out such projects, such wind energy projects?
Short answer to the question is no. We don't have anybody with direct experience in wind energy projects because we haven't had any such projects in our offshore. As mentioned in the previous response, there are many areas of transferable skills in terms of offshore safety regulation, geoscience, and other areas under our current remit that are directly transferable to the offshore energy sector.
Mais c'est quand même deux secteurs.
But these are two sectors which, to my mind, are quite different. I don't know what it's like for Newfoundland, and I don't know if you have this information, what projects are foreseen. I saw that for Nova Scotia, there was a dashboard for proposed projects, and I'm going to ask that question of Christine. There was a project for wind energy, a 5 gigawatt project between now and 2025, which is very close. Is there a similar project for Newfoundland with regard to the amount of production of wind energy that you would like, to your knowledge?
There's no such target for offshore renewable energy at this time in Newfoundland and Labrador. The focus in this province up to date has been almost exclusively onshore. So there are a number of proposed projects for onshore wind to hydrogen.
OK. Mais si je vous demande à vous...
But if I were to ask you today whether you have an idea of the costs that a 1 gigawatt project could represent if it were wind energy, what would it cost to transform that wind energy into hydrogen with special equipment? Do you have any idea what kind of costs you're looking at there?
I'll begin simply by saying I do not. It would vary widely depending on the project, I would think, but I don't have that information.
OK, bon.
All right. Well, I'm somewhat surprised at your response. Perhaps now, Ms. Christine, I saw the dashboard that was presented by Nova Scotia, and there was talk of 5 gigawatts. That seems fairly big to me, 5 gigawatts by 2025. Just to tell you that the entire production of Hydro-Quebec, with all its dams, with some thermal plants that exist and use wind energy, is 37 gigawatts. Hydro-Quebec is one of the largest clean electricity producers in the world. If you look at 5 gigawatts between now and 2025, that seems fairly optimistic to me. With regard to deployment, do you have any information on the deployment of wind energy that would occur in cooperation with your office?
So I just like to clarify the numbers that you're speaking to. So last September of 2022, the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, made an announcement, and his announcement was two parts. The first was that the first call for bids, which is how licenses are issued for offshore wind, will occur in 2025. So that means that once we become the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator, that we would administer a call for bids or a licensing process on their behalf no later than 2025. The second part of his announcement related to that by 2030, there will be 5 gigawatts of offshore wind potential licensed. That doesn't mean turbines in the ocean and producing electricity. It means at that time, there will be enough licenses in place with the potential to, in the future, install wind fields that could generate up to 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. So those are the provincial government targets that they have in place, and they are responsible for giving us the strategic direction for having and administering the call for bids process on their behalf. So those will be the targets that they will use when they're providing that strategic direction to us about future processes for licensing.
Merci beaucoup pour la clarification.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I have a question for both of you. If licenses are issued for possible projects, it means that there are associated costs that are known. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that there will be some federal government programs, some tax credits for the production of clean energy and hydrogen, clean electricity and hydrogen. Do you have any projections on the projects that you might have in mind that could where you could use those tax credits, or are you still at the very preliminary stages?
Thank you for the question. So with respect to economics of projects, we don't get involved with those as the regulator. So as I mentioned, both governments will provide us with the strategic direction on where they want offshore wind projects to be located and for us to administer the licensing process. And it's up to governments, and they would consider those economic considerations when telling us which areas to start the process for.
Thank you for your question and for your answers. We'll now move to Mr. Angus from the New Democratic Party for 6 minutes. Go ahead. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for bringing your expertise. Mr. Tessier, I'd like to speak with you at the outset. You said that you've been meeting with the international regulators. We see huge projects coming on stream. Aberdeen, 5 years ago, I was reading about the downturn in the oil, offshore oil, and they were hoping that wind would out in the North Sea would create jobs. Now we're looking at thousands of jobs. We see the speed with which the United States under the Biden administration is moving very quickly. You said that you've met with regulators in Europe and Australia. Globally, are we looking at a revolution in energy with offshore wind?
I think it's fair to say that there is a unmistakable global movement to offshore renewable energy. And certainly in other parts of the world, offshore wind has taken on tremendous momentum. So the energy transition is underway, and it is undeniable. You're absolutely correct.
Thank you. Well, I spent some good times in Newfoundland and Labrador. I love the people, I love the place, but my God, it's windy. Are you telling me that you're going to be able to compete with those Australians, or do you have an advantage that you think if we get these projects up and running that we'll be able to hold our own?
I think the east coast of Canada has wind conditions that rival anywhere in the world, and Christine and I can argue about who has a better supply of wind.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's really surprised us from seeing what the Biden administration has put in terms of the tax credits and the incentives is how fast it's moved. That the U.S. is now on track to have twice the solar capacity by 2030 than what they had originally forecast just 3 years ago, and to have 43% more wind energy capacity than forecast in 2021. That's an enormous drive. How important is it for us to get in the game now? Because I'm worried, for example, my Conservative colleagues seem to want to block this legislation. If we're sitting at the side of the road as Europe, Australia, the States, other jurisdictions move ahead, will it impact potential to get investment into Newfoundland and Labrador if we don't move now?
I think we as the regulator would offer that time is of the essence, that there is a global imperative, both with respect to the energy transition and also energy security. So it is certainly not too soon for Canada to get into the game.
I've seen the Premier of Nova Scotia has been speaking up on the importance of us getting this legislation. Would you concur that it is really important that we have the legislation framework in place so that Nova Scotia could start putting the bids for offshore projects?
So the provincial government has issued, as I mentioned before, its targets for call for bids no later than 2025 and licensing of up to 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So with that, the governments would determine their strategic direction and then give us the timing. But we're being told to actively prepare to be ready to administer and run a call for bids by no later than 2025. So we're getting ready for that based on the priority of the provincial government.
If Nova Scotia wants to be ready to do the bids, that means at the federal level we have to get this done in 2024 so that you are in a position to do your work.
That is correct, yes.
I want to raise the issue of Sable Island. My Conservative colleagues seem to be concerned that this was chasing the oil sector away. I followed the Sable Island issue. I know that it drew a huge amount of response from fishers who are worried about the fragility of the marine operations, tourists, that this is a very unique place, environmental groups, just regular Nova Scotia citizens. So in the decision to stop the oil bid at Sable Island, the Premier of Nova Scotia had the veto if the federal government was going to try and push ahead with that, right? The Nova Scotia government is in the driver's seat to decide what should be protected and what shouldn't be.
So just to clarify, so when there is a fundamental decision for petroleum rights issuance, so if the board, our organization, makes a decision to issue a license and it relates to the Sable Island area, the provincial minister does have the right to veto that decision about issuing a license if it pertains to Sable Island. The recent call for bids was a joint veto by both ministers, and it didn't pertain to the provincial minister with using that right in relation to Sable Island.
Agreed that they had to protect that because it was a unique marine conservation region, but the Nova Scotia government could have done the veto on their own. I want to ask that because it's really important that we understand that if we're going to be looking at offshore wind, there will be times when questions of fragile marine ecosystems are going to be brought into play, and there's going to be concerns, and there's going to be opposition to one project, maybe not 2 projects, but maybe one project or another project. Will that same focus on making sure that this is done to protect the fragility of the Atlantic system, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's offshore wind, is that something that your board is capable and ready to take on?
So the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board has been around and regulating for over 30 years. And part of our mandate is safety of operations and workers and environmental protection. And we have regulated and had safe operations in the offshore. So we will continue to do that, and that will be a focus for us as we move forward with the offshore renewable energy mandate and expanded mandate for us. I can't speak on behalf of the ministers and what their decisions would be with respect to issuance of a license.
Thank you. We will now proceed to our next round of questioning. We'll start with Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Tessier again, I'm going to go in a little different direction here. On Thursday past, we had Minister O'Regan here, and he stated that One Ocean had been consulted during the forming of this bill. Does One Ocean have a mandate to liaise with and address wind energy, or is its sole mandate to liaise between the fishing and petroleum industries?
At this point, the mandate of One Ocean is specific to the fishing and petroleum sector.
So it wouldn't be possible for One Ocean to be consulted and take part in the consultation process with anything relating to wind energy?
I know there was a presentation at a One Ocean meeting in which Natural Resources Canada officials provided an overview of the legislation to participants in that meeting.
They present to anyone, or were they presented to?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Did they give a presentation themselves, One Ocean, or were they presented to?
Natural Resources Canada presented to the One Ocean members who were in attendance that day.
Oh, a consultation process, to the best of my knowledge, is a little bit of back and forth. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and I can't recall the extent to which there was discussion or questions and answers. I'm sure I was there. I don't remember specifically the details of the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Tessier. You spoke earlier about the importance of stability of regulations and how important it is to have a stable investment climate. So, based on your experience in dealing with the fishing industry and trying to zig and zag and keep everything together and working and producing, how important is it to have a good framework for fisheries consultation and engagement so that the energy industries and the fishing industry can coincide?
Mr. Chair, I think that member in particular would understand as well or better than anybody around the table that those industries, the petroleum sector and the fishing sector, are absolutely critical to our province and the economy of Canada. So it is absolutely critical to have an effective consultation and engagement framework in which fisheries interests are at the table with a meaningful say and a full voice.
So would it be even more important in the developing of wind energy to make sure that the fishing industry and the wind energy are getting along? Because I understand there's large geographical areas required for wind farms. So if the right framework is not in place, could that send a bad message to potential wind investors if they think there's going to be disruption or I'm searching for the right word, but you know what I'm trying to say?
Conflict, yeah. Yes, and those likely proponents are active in other parts of the world where the fisheries are important as well, maybe not to the same degree that they are in our part of the world. Currently, there's a committee undertaking a regional assessment of offshore wind in both of our provinces, and that committee is comprised of some very eminent people, and they are listening right now, and I would encourage both industries, the wind energy sector and the fishing sector, to engage with that committee and make sure that those concerns are heard.
But getting back to last week, we were told that these consultations had taken place prior to the tabling of the bill, which in fact I don't think it happened that way. Did it happen that way, to the best of your knowledge, that fishing industry was consulted prior to the tabling of the bill, as we were told in committee?
I couldn't say. Just we simply aren't the lead on the consultation, so I haven't been party to many of those discussions beyond the One Ocean one that we talked about earlier.
I've just got one quick question left. Can this bill be valid with the over 30 references to Bill C-69, which has been proved to be unconstitutional, can this bill move forward with those many references to Bill C-69? Yes or no?
Mr. Tessier, a brief answer, please. This time is up.
Unfortunately, I can't give you the yes or no. That's a question better posed to officials from the Government of Canada.
Mr. Tessier, we'll now proceed to Mr. Bruson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be sharing my time, in fact, with Ms. Jones. But just before, I wanted to ask some questions about the international context. Mr. Tessier, you, when you started, mentioned a number of countries that had made similar changes to their offshore petroleum boards to include renewables. I was wondering if perhaps you could tell me more about the conversations and what they were saying about our opportunities if we make that change.
Sure. I mean, the conversations from our perspective have really focused on what sort of competencies that we need as regulators to effectively take on this expansion of our mandate to offshore renewable energy projects. And they've been quite comforting and validating in that the assurance we get from our counterparts is that there are not significant expansions of competencies and skills required on the part of our staff in order to take this on. That was really our primary focus in engaging with our regulatory counterparts. Beyond that, as I think both Christine and I said in our opening comments, it's exciting, and it's exciting to see the regulators from around the world take on this new mandate and really become a part of the energy transition. And that's been really encouraging in our interactions with all of our counterparts in those countries mentioned and beyond.
If I can ask the same question from the Nova Scotia Board's perspective, as far as your conversations with other international regulators who have expanded their authorities to include offshore wind, what's the feedback that you've been receiving from them as to those opportunities?
So the feedback we've been receiving when we speak to members of the International Regulators Forum and the Global Offshore Wind Regulators Forum is that the transition worked really well, so that the majority of the skills that we have and the technical and the regulatory expertise that we have is directly transferable to regulating the offshore wind industry. So that process seems to go relatively seamless, recognizing that, there's always special skill sets you need at certain times in activity approvals and reviews, and we'll get those resources when we need them, or those tools when we need them. But we're also seeing the importance of being an energy regulator, because then you can consider all of, you already have the established knowledge of environmental concerns and that sort of thing. And another thing to point out, what is proposed in Bill C-49 is exactly the same that was done for the Canada Energy Regulator. They are a petroleum and an offshore renewable regulator at the time, and will be as well.
I'll go to Ms. Jones now, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruson. So I just want to pick up on a couple of things. One, we talked about energy security and how critical it is in all of Canada and Atlantic Canada as well, and how important it is for investors to have stability and that stability of protection when they're investing in projects in Canada. Do you see anything in Bill C-49 that erodes that stability and protection for investors in other offshore energy projects?
I do not.
I don't either.
Okay, thank you. I also want to clarify one other piece, and that is with regard to the fishing industry. And can you tell me what the relationship is now between the offshore boards and the fishing industry? What's the practice and process that you've set up for consultation as it related to the oil and gas industry? And is there a transfer of that systematic piece into further offshore energy development projects?
So with respect to the fishing industry, the fishing industry has coexisted with the offshore oil and gas industry in both the Nova Scotia and the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore board areas. So in Nova Scotia, I can speak to the process we use. We have a fisheries advisory committee, and that the current version of how that's set up has been in place since 2005. We recognize the importance of the fishers that are on this committee and their engagement and their insight that they give us. So through this committee, we recognize that with the future expansion of our mandate, we need to further build and help support them and also gain their insight. So we've been facilitating opportunities for governments to talk to the Fisheries Advisory Committee and for them to learn about the offshore renewable energy and offshore wind as it stands. We also are encouraging them to get involved in the regional assessment that's going on in both of our respective offshore areas. And we hope that the strong relationships we've made with the fishing industry will continue and that coexistence will continue into the future.
Thank you for that. We'll now proceed to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, Mr. Tessier. And the question is about the board, whose role is to actually look at new projects. There is kind of an auction made for new permits. To your knowledge, are there any new oil and gas projects that are waiting for approval?
There are no proposals before the board currently. The Beta Nord project is widely discussed, but it remains a hypothetical, and it is being assessed by Equinor in terms of its economic viability. So it is not before our organization at this time.
Est-ce que dans le projet de loi, il y a
Does the bill contain a mechanism that allows you to withdraw permits that you may have granted for oil and gas projects?
The board can cancel an interest for violation of conditions, and we can refuse to issue an authorization. Bill C-49 has an additional provision with respect to cancellation of interest by ministers as opposed to the board.
Je sais pas si
I don't know if you're going to be able to answer the following question, but this bill is being presented as a type of energy transition bill. To me, there's going to be a transition to low carbon emissions from high carbon emissions. Do you think that it is wishful thinking that we can keep on with oil gas projects if the goal is to have lower carbon emission projects?
I think ministers and Premier Fury and others have spoken eloquently about the place of oil in the energy transition. I think there's going to be a place for oil in the world for the foreseeable future, and we all appreciate and recognize the urgency of that energy transition that you described and the imperative to lower emissions.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you both for your excellent testimony. At the end of the day, this is about the climate, but this is also about jobs and about people who often, the expertise that they bring and have traveled all over the world, are able to actually work from their homes and not have to travel as much. Mr. Tessier, you said that regulators around the world are taking part in a similar process. Would you say that Canada is on track with what we're negotiating here to put us ready with our competitors in Europe, Australia, the United States? Is this a standard, straight-up process we're dealing with here?
Yes.
If we vote, I'm hoping we'll vote soon, that you can get down to work so that we can start getting the bids for offshore projects and start competing, take some of that money that's going to the United States and bring it to Newfoundland and Labrador. Are you ready for that?
We stand ready for offshore renewable energy projects.
Thank you. And Ms. Bonnell, you're in the same situation in Nova Scotia. Would that be correct?
Yes, we are actively preparing for the expansion of our mandate and the increased interest in offshore renewable energy projects such as offshore wind.
We have the premiers on side. Your boards are ready. We have an international market moving. The only thing stopping us right now is Pierre Poilievre seems to be against the bill. Would it send a bad message if this legislation got blocked up in the House of Commons so that you weren't ready for 2025?
So we need this bill in order to become the Canada-Nova Scotia offshore energy regulator. So if the bill doesn't pass, then we cannot administer the land sales and meet the targets that were set out by the provincial government.
Okay, and Mr. Tessie, I want to clarify on that because I think it's really important that my Conservative colleagues understand what we're talking about here and changing the mandate of the board. You would be the only vehicle for us to be able to get offshore wind projects off the Atlantic, correct? We couldn't use another form. We couldn't come up with some other mechanism. You are the mechanism that we need to have set up ready to do this. Is that correct?
If it is to be pursued through joint management, our opinion would be that this is the best avenue to reach that objective.
Okay, well then let's get this done so we can get some of those big projects off the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is to Ms. Bonnell-Esner. Ms. Bonnell-Esner, how many oil and gas projects have been vetoed off Nova Scotia's coast since 2015?
So there has been one exploration license that was jointly set aside or vetoed by both ministers in December of 2023. There have been no oil and gas projects put forward for development in that time period that you noted.
So in that vetoing, you know, in the past, in the olden days of the CNSO PB, would that vetoing have taken place in the same fashion, or maybe would your board have had a little more power?
So the veto, going by, not to speak on behalf of the minister, so that was the first time that an exploration license was set aside or vetoed by both ministers. The ministers released a statement, which is public, that said that the board followed the process that is put in place by them. So we followed the process and we approved the license. The ministers felt, and then this is from their joint statement, that there's further policy discussions that need to happen that are outside the mandate of our organization. So the governments are having those discussions and we're waiting to get information back from them on how to move forward.
But, you know, back in 2010 to 2015 or even earlier, would your board have had full jurisdiction? Would the governor and council have had the power to make that veto?
Yes, so the legislation that provides the ministers with that opportunity, if they choose to jointly set aside or veto an exploration license, has existed in the Accord Act since 1990. So that hasn't changed. And there has been, so the board has not always followed its process correctly and made the fundamental decisions. It was just this time the ministers chose not to approve that fundamental decision. It was the first time that they used that opportunity to do so.
Oh, so that ability was already in place?
Yes, it's been in place since the board was formed.
And I'm sure when that legislation was formed in that way, those who formed it probably weren't expecting to have to use it, and it might have been a long shot. But now that it's been used, do you think that there's a possibility that diminishes investor confidence in our offshore?
I can't speak to that because investor confidence isn't part of our mandate. That is a question that I would put to both ministers when they made that decision and the considerations for that.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Tessier. Mr. Tessier, when you meet with regulators worldwide, have you met with any regulators in the wind energy sector?
Yes, a number of our counterparts in the petroleum sector have already received the expanded mandate. In addition, as part of my tour of Germany last summer, we spent some time with the German regulator.
How about any other areas like Norway or up and down the eastern seaboard? Have you met with any of those folks that have a sizable fishing industry that may be in conflict with wind energy?
Sure. Yeah, I think you mentioned two right there, Norway and the United States.
How's the experience been there? Has it been going smoothly? Because we want this to go smooth. We want this investment. So we don't want to run into the pitfalls and traps that have been there in other jurisdictions. We want investor confidence in the wind energy sector. So how have they worked in those countries, and have they had any conflicts that they've had a tough time ironing out that may have decreased investor confidence in offshore wind?
I think there have been some hiccups in the United States, and I think that's underscored the importance of undertaking those discussions with sensitivity and proactivity. I can't speak to the effect that it may have had on investor confidence. I'm just not sure.
Can we avoid those things here?
Mr. Small, time's up. Thank you, Mr. Tessier. We'll now go to Ms. Jones for 5 minutes.
Thank you. To my colleague opposite, I'm surprised that you're looking for a way to prove the project when you guys have said that you're totally against a bill and that you'll be voting against a bill. But we also heard, testimony today that this bill is very necessary in order to move forward with alternate energy development in the offshore in Atlantic Canada. So my first question is, if this bill fails, because the Conservatives are blocking it and voting against it, what does that mean
Point
to
of order,
Atlantic
Chair.
Canada and to the energy
We have a
industry?
point of order. Ms. Jones, we have a point of order. I would ask you to pause. Go ahead, Mr. Patzer, on the point of order.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we know, the NDP Liberal Coalition will get this bill passed right through. We are not blocking or obstructing this bill. We are just merely raising the concerns about the unconstitutional factors of the bill that should be resolved before it passes. So that way there's certainty and confidence for investors. Thank you.
Mr. Patzer, that's more of a debate than it is of procedural relevance. I ask us to use, as I do at every committee, and I think we've been good today so far, not to use point of orders for debate, but we use it for procedural relevance. But thank you for interjecting, and I will go back to Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, my apologies. We'll go back to where you left off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and there was no point of order. I think we've already established with the witnesses today in the previous questions that I asked, when I asked if this bill erodes the stability and protection for investors, and the response from both panelists was no. My question now is, if the bill does not pass, what does this mean for Atlantic Canada in terms of the work that's been done to try and diversify the energy portfolio in those regions? What does it mean to the economy, for jobs, for skilled workers? I believe in the information that I have in the briefings I've been given that this is not just one of the most environmentally friendly projects that we can do in consultation with all industry, but it's also one of the most important initiatives that we have in continuing to stimulate growth and jobs in the economy. Can you certainly add to those comments, please?
I guess the best I can offer is that if Bill C-49 or something like it is not put into force, offshore renewable energy will not be regulated through an agent and product of joint management. So it would, one can assume, look much more federal in its regulation.
Bonell Eisenhower.
Sorry, I would agree with Scott that if the governments wanted to follow with the joint management regime and not and move forward with us as the regulator, if the bill doesn't pass, we can't be the regulator. And with us being the regulator, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting at a really good place, and we're ready to go. So if the bill doesn't pass, then some other form would have to be determined on how that would be, and it might not be the joint management, which is what the province would want. So then it would take longer to get going.
Can you tell me what the interest is in offshore wind and other renewable energy developments in both your provinces right now?
So with respect to Nova Scotia, there is interest. We have had lots of potential companies knock on our door and ask about our role as a regulator because they've seen that the bill is tabled and they want to understand the process. So we've talked about our experience in regulating offshore oil and gas, and we encourage them to get in touch with both governments who are writing the bill and the associate regulations so that they can understand what the regime will look like.
I've only met with a very small number of possible proponents in light of the fact that the regulatory regime is not in place. And similar to Christine, we steer them towards governments at this point and to the regional assessment. So I'm confident that once the regulatory regime and the legislative regime are in place, interest will pick up because, as Mr. Angus mentioned, the wind is here already.
One other question as well. Once a project comes before the CNLOPB or the CNSOPB to be reviewed, what's the process that you guys would take? Is there an external consultation process that you undertake as well, or is that work already done before it gets to your board table?
So with respect to engagement, there's opportunities for engagement with fishers, Indigenous groups, and other users of the sea throughout the process at many steps. So land tenure, there's lots of opportunities for engagement. For a site assessment, there will be engagement, and then it moves into if the development of 10 or more wind turbines would trigger the Impact Assessment Act. So there's engagement through that process. And then for us to authorize a project for construction or development and production, there would be engagement opportunities for fishers, Indigenous groups, and others who want to be involved in the process to help inform us for our decisions.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, first I want to thank the witnesses for providing testimony today. Thank you for your testimony and for appearing for this study. If you would like to send in additional information via a brief, you can do so. So please try to do so before 5 p.m. on February 16th. Thank you once again for providing testimony. Colleagues, we'll now suspend approximately 5 minutes to change panels. We're suspended. I call this meeting back to order. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October 17, 2023, and the adopted motion of Wednesday, December 13, 2023, the committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Witnesses today, Mr. Norman Massou, Scientific Director, the Trottier Energy Institute, Polytechnique Montreal by video conference. Mr. Peter Nicholson, Chair of the Board, Canadian Climate Institute by video conference. From the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association, Mr. Michael Baron, President by video conference. From the International Union of Operating Engineers, Mr. Stephen Schumann, Canadian Government Affairs Director. From Nova Scotia Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement, Chris Vascoto, Manager by video conference. And from Prince Edward Islands Fishermen's Association, Mr. Ian McPherson, Executive Director by video conference. We will start with, in person, Mr. Stephen Schumann from the International Union of Operating Engineers. You have 5 minutes, sir, and I will be using these cards.
Yep.
Yellow to give you a 30-second warning, red to let you know that time is up. I will try not to interrupt mid-sentence. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the International Union of Operating Engineers in Canada, I'm honored to appear before the committee today. The majority of our members build and maintain Canada's infrastructure. We build it all, such as hydro dams, mines, nuclear plants, solar farms, wind turbines, and pipelines. To list a few things we build. We fully support Bill C-49 and the development of clean energy projects. However, the bill does not address the important issues of ensuring Canadians have the opportunity to work on these projects. We have noticed when large projects are discussed, labor tends to be seen as an afterthought and not a forethought in decision-making. Wind farms cannot be built without a steady supply of labor, and labor must be a key focus. The Public Policy Forum estimates that the development of a 1,000 offshore wind turbine near Sable Island would employ 30,000 Canadians annually during construction. It sounds wonderful, but unfortunately there's no guarantee that Canadians will actually fill many of those positions. If the federal government truly wants to support offshore wind, it must make measures to guarantee Canadians actually work on these projects. We believe in Canada's best interests to encourage, through Bill C-49, the adoption of measures like project labor agreements, which cover all construction work for the project, and utilize Canada's skilled tradespeople and apprentices, and ensure that any foreign workers are paid a prevailing wage. And at minimum, strengthen the industrial benefits component found within the Nova Scotia and Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board accords. If we look at what's happening in the U.S. on offshore wind, they have the Jones Act, which ensures that between American ports, including offshore platforms, vessels are flagged, crewed, and built by Americans. Some states have project labor agreements in place for offshore wind projects. The Biden administration encourages project labor agreements and community benefit agreements for these projects through their offshore leases. And in the U.S., there's a national agreement with Ørsted, a project proponent which will help build the local workforce by guaranteeing a certain percentage of workforce for offshore work is local and provided by unions, and that our American members are able to shadow and receive on-the-job training. This allows a building up of a domestic workforce gradually and realistically for the work that project proponents would rather otherwise seek foreign labor to do. But even with this in place, it's estimated currently only about 40% of the work is being performed by Americans. And at least there are attempts in the U.S. to ensure that Americans are working on these projects. Nothing like these efforts have been discussed by any level of government in Canada. Unions, including our own, will have discussions with offshore wind project proponents, but with no incentives from the federal or provincial governments, it's a challenge for us to ensure Canadian workers are able to work on these projects. As of right now, there's no guarantee that Canadians will have any of the offshore work or even much of the onshore work of these projects. We ask the committee consider labor guarantees in its deliberations on Bill C-49 and amend the bill to include a requirement that project proponents adopt project labor agreements, Canadian crewing requirements on vessels, and at minimum, some safeguards to ensure that Canadians actually get to work on these projects. Project labor agreements are more than just a guarantee that local workers will have jobs on these projects. They're also a way for Canada to build its workforce by enshrining targets for the involvement of underrepresented workers such as women and Indigenous Canadians. These types of agreements are nothing new to Atlantic Province, and in fact have helped Atlantic Canadians obtain work on the projects that have impacted their communities. Federal policies and incentives relating to offshore wind development should aim to benefit Canadian workers and their communities. We believe that the federal government must take the lead in every effort to ensure that Bill C-49 reflects the goal of supporting and building Canada's workforce. And some of the suggestions we've outlined today will be the best avenues for doing so. So thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. We will now go to Mr. Mousseau for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. Let me go back on this legislation, which is certainly relevant, but perhaps has some inconsistencies. It's a question of adding to the licenses that are already foreseen to the licenses regarding oil and gas industries. Certainly there is some opportunity to create more wind and energy and tidal energy, and it's important for the governments to get the tools that they need to develop projects that are based on that, but also they have to facilitate the going forward of projects as quickly as possible to produce some more renewable energy. So I think that in that regard, the bill is necessary, but I see there are two major issues and some inconsistencies with these objectives. There's also a lack of integration with the other jurisdictions when it comes to renewable energy productions. There are variances in the way these are produced compared to oil and gas energy. So let me first go over the inconsistencies with our climate goals. Right now, the way the bill is presented, there are the different types of energy are all on equal footing. This equal footing is incompatible when you look at what international organizations say, which is that if we are to achieve our climate objectives, those were agreed to by the Paris Agreement, we need to ban the exploitation of new fossil deposits. So this bill should therefore not provide for short-term horizon. There would have to be a short-term horizon whereby the new fossil hydrocarbon permits should be prohibited, or at the very least require that part of the mandate to be reaffirmed every 5 years. As well as you have to review the oil and gas developments offshore. If you look at the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord, it does not reflect the nature of the bill, which deals with both fossil hydrocarbon development and renewable energy. With regard to the priority given to renewable energies, it's important to recognize that renewable energy does not have the same issues as oil and gas. You have to transport it. There is reference to renewable projects, but there isn't really a real market for the production of renewable energy, despite the visibility that is given to that. It means that the majority, if not all of the production, should be basically coming from the shore and be sent to market. So we can't necessarily move forward with these renewable projects because they are offshore. Sure, they have to be integrated into a market that is going to bind all of the provinces together. There's no definition of potential collaboration beforehand, And there's no way that you can accelerate the approval of these projects. There are going to be transportation lines to the provinces, and you have to be able to transport the energy into outlying areas. So how are we going to develop mechanisms that are going to be able to allow for more overall approvals and therefore extend the lifetime of these projects? So I think that the bill should recognize that oil and gas be put on a boat and then be transported. That is one thing, but if you're going to look at wind energy and other types of energy, you have to have different levels of approval. So how can you simplify all this and ensure that the renewable energy projects are accelerated? So those are my main comments on this topic.
Statement. We'll now go to Mr. Nicholson from the Canadian Climate Institute for your opening statement. Please go ahead. You're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself and then begin.
Thought that was happening automatically. So thanks very much, Mr. Chair, to both you and the committee for providing this forum to address the potential for really massive offshore renewable energy development off our Atlantic coast, a scale of opportunity that quite frankly has been underestimated. Now, realization of the opportunity will depend on many factors, but one essential precondition is an appropriate regulatory framework, and hence the relevance of Bill C-49. Now, I'm going to very briefly summarize some of the content of a paper I wrote entitled Catching the Wind that was published last October by the Public Policy Forum. The purpose was to outline the opportunity to develop Atlantic offshore wind energy at scale as a significant contribution to Canada's clean energy requirement. I want to emphasize that we're talking here about a project of national significance, not just a regional project, although there would be very significant economic benefits for Atlantic Canada. Now, to date, much of the discussion of Atlantic offshore wind has been in the context of green hydrogen for export primarily to European markets. And while this may be a promising opportunity, in my view, green hydrogen is not the biggest prize. The first and best use for Atlantic offshore wind would be to supply the national grid, to provide massive amounts of clean energy as far west as Ontario. Now, the starting premise is Canada's and indeed the world's commitment to eventually decarbonize the energy system. This will require an enormous expansion of electricity generation and transmission, both nationally and globally. Now, how much? In Canada's case, we can draw on a detailed scenario published last June by the Canada Energy Regulator. The CER projected that to achieve net zero, Canada will need to double electricity generation. And where will all this new energy come from? And now, according to the CER scenario, about 15% will be from new hydro development. Some 25% will be from a tripling of nuclear generation. Another 15% or so would come from a mix of solar, biomass, and geothermal. But almost half of the new generation would come from a 7-fold increase in wind energy. And in the case of Ontario, for example, electricity generation would more than triple in the net zero scenario, with almost 2/3 of the growth coming from a 12-fold increase in wind generation. Now, where will all this new wind generation come from? Obviously, a great deal will have to come from a massive build out of terrestrial wind farms across Canada, particularly in the west. But wind facilities on the unprecedented scale required can generate very significant land use conflicts, particularly in more heavily populated areas where local resistance has already manifested. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to generate massive new energy from the strong and consistent winds blowing off our Atlantic coast. Now, to illustrate with just one hypothetical example, imagine one or more offshore wind facilities capable of generating a combined 15 gigawatts of electricity, a very large amount, enough to power 6 to 7 million average Canadian homes. This power could be provided by 1,015 megawatt turbines. They would occupy a total area of roughly 3,000 to 4,000 square kilometers of ocean surface. And it's important to recognize that wind turbines at this enormous scale would be separated by at least 1.5 kilometers, thus greatly reducing the impact on marine activity and traffic. Now, there are a great many areas off the Atlantic coast that afford excellent sighting conditions, including in an example I provided in the paper, the vast Sable Island Bank, though of course not on Sable Island itself. Now, there would be very significant direct economic benefit associated with the installation and ongoing operation of such a facility. For example, as was mentioned by Mr. Chairman a moment ago, about 30,000 jobs during a multi-year installation and roughly 1,200 permanent jobs associated with maintenance. Fortunately, there's already a base of relevant marine skills in the region, and with training, Atlantic Canada could eventually become a global center of expertise in offshore wind. And of course, well, I see that my time is about up. I mean, the challenge here, Mr. Chair, is going to be to mobilize the enormous investment to establish both the wind facilities and the expanded transmission westward from the coast. This will require many tens of billions spent over many years, but we are talking about an investment to secure both our future economy and a livable planet. So, in conclusion, it is quite obvious that we have here an opportunity, a national opportunity of historic proportions, and for that opportunity to come to pass, Canada urgently needs a regulatory framework equal to the unprecedented nature of that opportunity. Thank you very much, and I welcome questions.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Mr. Michael Barron, President of the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association. Mr. Barron, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair and committee members. Once again, my name is Michael Barron. I'm the President of the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association. I represent multi-species harvesters. I am also an independent owner-operator harvester as well. I sit before you today scared for my livelihood and every other inshore harvester's livelihood. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on Bill C-49. I must start my remarks by stating that 5 days is a little rush to appear on a significant bill such as this. It is no different than the timeline that has been proposed for the passage of Bill C-49. It is rushed. The new green offshore wind industry on the east coast of Canada will be the first for Canada, first for Nova Scotia, first for our marine environment. So many unknowns and so many very different variations from oil and gas industry. We feel this new industry constitute its very own piece of legislation, not an amended one where we are trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. Time has dictated the process. As an industry that is a major economic driver of Nova Scotia, the lack of consultation has not gone unnoticed by all fish harvesters associations throughout Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia provides Canada with more than 35% of the world's shellfish exports. We rely on the federal government to protect our interests and to ensure this valuable, high-protein, low-carbon produced food source continues to feed a global market. Nova Scotia alone in 2018 generated $1.9 billion, and on the same basis in 2018, the total of Nova Scotia employment impact of the industry was 16,300 jobs and $865 million in wages and salaries. This income supports community infrastructure, schools, hospitals. Further, the wealth generated permits people to purchase food, other goods and services, and remain and prosper in our coastal communities. We understand that our climate is changing, and we realize that we have all a collective role in trying to find viable solutions. The fishing industry is not against green energy sources. To give an example of the fishing sector and offshore wind that is coexisting is Scotland. The picture that is being painted, however, is not as glamorous as we are being led to believe. Scotland has a population of 5.4 million people, and their landed seafood value is 617 million pounds, which converts to $1 billion Canadian. So in comparison, Nova Scotia is just 1/5 the size of Scotland, and in 2023, Nova Scotia's landed value was $2.8 billion. Scottish fishermen have also stated the amount of space they are losing to offshore farms is affecting their viability to access the fishing grounds and resources. They have also provided documents to show wind farms within marine conservation areas. The Scottish Federation feels that allowing wind farms and within the conservation areas is infringing on their way to operate viably. Turbines have a rated capacity that only allows at certain wind speeds. For example, an 8 megawatt turbine is not always producing 8 megawatts. It's only when it's ideal. They are going to need a backup if necessary. They have cut in, cut out speeds. They cut in at 10 kilometers and they cut out at 90 kilometers. Considering this in context of Nova Scotia weather, where hurricanes are increasing with frequency and severity, according to the developer that met with my staff, Bluefoot Energy, the ideal depth for a turbine is 16 to 21 fathom, which is prime lobster areas here in LFA 27 in Cape Breton. This also affects spatial planning on other MPAs, agriculture, shipping and transport, and marine navigation. If offshore wind farms line our pristine coastline and the inshore fishery is displaced from our traditional fishing grounds, what will it be in the line of compensation? In Bill C-49, Section 183.22, the promotion of compensation policies, the regulator shall promote and monitor compensation policies for fishers sponsored by the fishing industry, respecting damages of non-attributable nature. Note, assuming this means sponsored as put forward by and not funded by, there is no legal requirement for developers to provide any compensation to fishers from this bill. Regulators need to be held accountable for decisions and consequences. They need to be able to hold wind developers and operators accountable by sound legislation, clearly written and understood by all marine users. Lessons should be learned from previous track records in tidal within the Bay of Fundy and hydro at Muskrat Falls in Newfoundland. In closing, a more involved, in-depth consultation needs to be had with other primary users of this space moving forward. I thank you for allowing me to present the following and looking forward to your questions. And please note that I shortened this up in the process of time and all of my remarks have been submitted. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Chris Vascoto from the Nova Scotia's Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide our perspective on the bill before you. The Nova Scotia Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement is comprised of harvesters from across Nova Scotia. We arose out of a shared need to communicate common industry perspectives on energy development in the marine waters surrounding Nova Scotia. By bringing industry participants from all sectors, species, and regions, we undertook to assemble and communicate our shared concerns to proponents, regulators, and government on the development of energy resources in the waters that support the fisheries and hence the communities of this province we call home. That this alliance includes participation from over 20 harvesting groups from across fisheries demonstrates the importance with which the fishing sector views offshore energy development. This issue is cross-cutting, and my voice is the amplification of their concerns, questions, and solutions. To be clear, members of the NSFA-EE do not oppose offshore energy development, but seek that it be done in a responsible manner. Historically, members have relied on the federal government to protect the interests and viability of their enterprises. They have worked to support science, refine rules for the fishery, and have tried to be part of the solution and, in turn, rely on the government to make good decisions. Perhaps this is why members are surprised and dismayed by the content of the bill before you. Collectively, we understand that, as a planet, we are facing profound challenges related to climate change risk and realize that we have all an important role in finding a viable solution. However, rushing poorly thought legislation to govern an industrial marine development that remains largely in an experimental stage for Atlantic waters and lacks proper safeguards to ensure a viable and resilient coastal economy is myopic and will act only to damage those that are perhaps the most informed stewards of the resources, while potentially facilitating even more environmental damage. Quite simply, we are concerned that the legislation as drafted fails to account or even consider the fundamental differences between the offshore petroleum industry, which this legislation was originally intended to apply to, and the burgeoning offshore wind industry that is dramatically different in structure, function, and impacts. For instance, this legislation provides clear guidance for compensation of impacts to harvesters related to the construction, operation, and demobilization of oil and gas facilities or offshore wind sites related to the release of debris. Let us be clear. This is to address direct damages if a trap is lost or a vessel is damaged as a result of falling infrastructure or otherwise, impacts that occur in a very narrow period of time. Any other consideration is directed to the Fisheries Act, confined to the release of deleterious substances, meaning a spill for oil and gas. But what does this mean for offshore wind? The answer is that it isn't even relevant. Unlike an offshore oil and gas development, wind farms render vast areas of the ocean offline because of safety concerns and operational challenges as they harvest energy from the wind before it enters the ocean environment. It has been demonstrated that the act of harvesting wind stands to alter the very basis of the ocean ecosystems and the marine communities and fisheries they support, meaning that the very existence of a farm stands to alter fisheries productivity, stock distribution, and even the ability of commercial fish stocks to survive and flourish. The current legislation before you provides no avenue for such losses to be recovered from offshore wind operators and appears to be intentionally silent on it. Perhaps because because the bill reads as a short rewrite of a petroleum-based perspective. This is untenable at best. Furthermore, as legislators, you have an opportunity to ensconce in law that the benefits of offshore wind development be required legally to be shared with those communities, fishers, and industries that stand to be impacted by generation, operation, transmission, and potentially via lost fisheries production. Again, this legislation before you speaks to sharing royalties with governments, but not communities or people. This is problematic. In Atlantic Canada, we are deep in a regional assessment process that, as approved by the federal and provincial ministers, seeks to identify potential areas for offshore wind development in the marine environment. Yet embracing the outcomes of this process and using those selected areas to guide further detailed study and subsequent development is also completely absent in this legislation, meaning that despite all of the efforts of the fishing industry to help identify low conflict areas for offshore wind and to assure appropriate baseline information, mitigation measures, and monitoring is in place, there is no security that development would be restricted to those selected areas.
Pardon, point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Si,
I will ask you to hold one sec. Go ahead.
Si le témoin pouvait ralentir le débit parce que les interprètes sont...
I'm sorry, if the speaker could speak a little bit slower, that would be great because the interpreters can't follow him. He's speaking too quickly.
Mr. Vascoto, I would just ask you to speak, although you have about 30 seconds left, just a tad slower so they can make sure they interpret everything you say. Go ahead.
Thank you. My apologies. Again, this demonstrates legislation that is rushed and without due consideration of the situation and the approach to development being undertaken. We have tried to raise these issues with your senior officials and have been told to take it to committee and to discuss directly with you. Here we are, and I sincerely hope you listen to our advice. In short, the legislation before you has clearly been rushed in its development, and while it may be well suited for its original purpose of ensuring that offshore petroleum development is conducted in a fair and environmentally safe manner, it is not appropriate for offshore wind development. We intend to provide a more fulsome brief to this committee that includes a shared perspective of others in the fishing industry, but given we only received our invite scant days ago, we have been able to complete this in time for today. Let us be clear. We have the time to develop good legislation and develop a gold standard for offshore energy development. We have the responsibility to do it right for our members, our communities, and the marine environment that they depend on for survival. We implore you to take that time and use it wisely. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Mr. Ian McPherson from Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Prince Edward Island Fishermen's Association and the 1,360 captains we represent, I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Natural Resources for the opportunity to present today on aspects of Bill C-49. We understand that the purpose of the proposed legislation is threefold. 1, to form a new regulatory scheme. 2, the establishment of a ministerial decision-making process. And 3, make regulations to prohibit commencement or continuation of petroleum for renewable energy projects. Although the current jurisdictions referenced in the bill refer to Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia, it is important to note other Atlantic provinces such as Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick can directly be impacted by damage to the marine environment or marine aquatic life in the Gulf region. It is critical that an overarching board be aware of the following concerns and must be addressed and assessed in assessing either ocean-based petroleum or energy projects. The following is a list of preliminary concerns around offshore wind development. We suggest this level of detail be included in documents related to offshore projects so that important areas do not get missed or minimized. This can happen when federal and provincial jurisdiction overlaps or environmental studies do not have the same terms of reference. The challenge for first-time and new projects is the lack of historical and baseline data for an area under consideration for development. For example, negative impacts on North American lobster may not be felt for 5 to 7 years in the future. In terms of fishing and interactions, what type of gear restrictions may be applied within offshore wind farm areas? Some European offshore wind farms have prohibitions on bottom trawling due to concerns regarding interactions that may occur between trawl gear and the offshore wind seafloor infrastructure. Do offshore wind companies plan to continue to allow fishing within lease areas? How are they going to minimize these interactions, ensuring the safety and livelihoods of fishers in these areas? In Ireland, where fishing remains permitted, fishing effort has been shown to decrease due to fisher concerns about safety. In current marine spatial planning in the Gulf region, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada is using adjacency estimates for catch locations and not factual data. What process will ensure that data is reviewed with fishers to confirm DFO assumptions are correct? In terms of construction, concern around the acoustic impacts caused during the planning and construction phases of a farm or turbine construction. Depending on the technology used, is it fixed or floating? What data is available on this? Acoustic noise from pile driving has been shown to have a wide range of negative impacts on many species. How will this be assessed? Disruptive behavior of marine mammals occurs at ranges of many kilometers when interactions occur near noise sources. How will this be tracked? How will acoustic noise from pile driving impacts the health and behavior of marine animals, including American lobster and various species of demersal fish, can be assessed? How will the effects of increased shipping noise during construction be assessed? What type of tools will be incorporated into seafloor mapping at lease sites? What is the lifespan of these units, and who is responsible for dismantling and decommissioning costs? We are very concerned with the use of seismic testing. It has been shown both regionally and globally to negatively impact various aspects of marine invertebrates' health and behavior. Data is lacking on the long-term effects on reproduction and how future stocks could be affected by the development of offshore wind farms. Electromagnetic fields, like those produced by the seafloor cables used to transfer power from offshore wind farms to land, have the potential to negatively affect the early development of larval crustaceans in their vicinity. How will this be assessed? Last but not least, the fishing industry has been working tirelessly to protect North Atlantic right whales with mitigation measures. Fishers have spearheaded the testing of low breaking strength rope and surface rope. We've been asked to move our gear. I'll paraphrase here. We've been asked to move our gear out of areas where whales have been spotted. This will not be possible with floating turbines. Collisions and entanglements be minimized. And shipping traffic will also increase during construction and maintenance. How will that density be assessed? In summation, we currently know the value of our fisheries from both a monetary and community contribution perspective. It is critical that policies and decision makers understand large-scale ocean-based projects can have immediate and far-reaching negative aspects on our fisheries. Electric power is important. Food is more important. No project should proceed if our valuable Canadian food resource are put at risk. Thank you. Sorry, I was a little over there, Chair.
No, thank you for your opening statement. I would just ask everyone, if you would like to provide more information, we do have till February 16th, 5 p.m. to provide a brief. I know that was mentioned in a few opening statements. But we will now proceed to our first round of questions. We may only get through one full round, but we will begin with Mr. Small from the Conservative Party of Canada for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for taking part in the study and second reading of this bill. I'll start with Mr. Vizcato. Mr. Vizcato, do you think that Conservatives are trying to hang up this legislation, or do you think that we're simply wanting to give stakeholders like yourself, because you are a stakeholder when wind energy and the fishing industry competes for the same territory? What's your opinion on that?
Thank you very much for the question. To be honest, as we've been sitting back trying to engage in this process, we've actually been very welcoming of the opportunity to come to committee and make these statements. In many respects, this is democracy in action. You've been able to hear our concerns. You've been able to hear Mike's concerns. You've been able to hear concerns about labor. The hope is that these conversations that are happening at this committee will then be taken back to help shape a better piece of legislation that it better shapes the landscape. So to be honest, I would like to thank the opportunity for us to be able to come forward and have these discussions. Thank you.
So, Mr. Vizcato, had this bill went from first to second to third reading without entering committee for review, where would that have left you with your concerns?
Thank you again for the question. As we have been having these discussions internally about offshore energy development, offshore wind energy in particular, we would have been at the end point of having to see this get delivered to us. And then you would have been seeing us being forced to actually come back to try and find an avenue of recourse to be able to solve these problems before they became legislated in law. We would have been working closely with the CNSOER under its new name brand. But really, this is a question about trying to solve the problem before it becomes a problem. And this is what we view this process as being all about.
Would you say that this process will lend more certainty to those who want to eventually invest in our offshore? Well, could the process like this put a framework in place that your industry needs to make sure that your concerns are looked after?
Thank you. Yes, I would say that this process of being able to provide our perspective and see it come out through with the legislation inspires confidence on the fishing industry, and you become much less obstructive towards any sort of ocean development that's ongoing if you know that your concerns are being mindfully cared for during the development of the legislation during the implementation of the regulations. I also would suggest that a proponent would be in a much better position understanding that the fishing industry had confidence in what was being done as opposed to taking another perspective. Thank you.
So, again, Mr. Vizcato, on February 29th, Minister Wilkinson said, and I quote, "We see the bill as standing as is," in response to our questioning about whether or not he'd be open to amendments or changes. So, if this bill doesn't change to address the framework that you're looking for as a fishing industry stakeholder and for the 20 groups that you represent, where does that leave you?
Thank you. That's a great question. An intractable position always generates some degree of pushback. I can envision the discussions that we'll have is going to be a now what are we going to do that we don't have confidence that our interests and our concerns are being upheld. I hope that there will be wisdom in what has been discussed at this committee by all parties, and everybody's perspective will be seen in what develops as the final product. Thank you.
So if we can't get a final product out of this bill that builds in the framework for consultation that your industry needs, could that breed conflict, and could that cause investors to be less certain about investing in wind energy in Atlantic Canada?
Thank you. I would say it wouldn't just be investors being concerned about investing in wind energy. I think the fishing community themselves would be concerned about providing investment for much needed renewal of fleets, much needed renewal of plants. Really, this becomes a larger question if there's a lack of confidence. Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier that vast areas of ocean will become offline. What does that look like to you in terms of the economic impacts on the fishing industry, and possibly could it also affect the conducting of DFO science within wind farms, based on your knowledge?
Thank you. Yes, very much so. I mean, if we look at this, an idea of 5 gigawatts of power with your industry accepted about 5 megawatts per kilometer, you're looking at about 1,000 square kilometers of ocean that would be immediately taken out. What that means is that scientific surveys can't be done in those areas, which means we no longer have confidence in this type of stock dynamics that are occurring within those areas themselves. So it begins to undermine the science, and depending on where these areas were placed. And Michael put this very, very clearly, saying, if you went to those less than 30-meter depths and you put it entirely within a lobster producing area, you're taking one of the most valuable exports out of Nova Scotia, and you're knocking a hole in its ability to actually land that wild fish and seafood. At the same time, fishers can't just adjust once you take these areas out, because it piles more effort into a small area. We can actually do more damage to the stock. So there's a lot of pieces, a lot of strings that you can pull at this ball, and you start to see that this is a far more difficult question than simply talking about one small piece of ground. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening round of questions and answers. We'll now go to Mr. Sobrera for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with Parliamentary Secretary Jones on this round. Just one question over to Mr. Schuman. Steve, your association or your union represents workers across the country, and those would be employed also in terms of the renewable energy sector, in this case, offshore wind. We've put forward a number of measures here with our government, including in the Budget 2022, the Fall Budget 2023, Fall Economic Statement, in terms of the tax credits, the ITCs, which will require us to make sure we pay prevailing union wages and provide apprenticeship training opportunities to be met in order to receive the maximum credit rate for the clean technology, clean hydrogen, clean electricity, and CCUS investment tax credits. In your eyes, along with C49 and what we've laid out in ITCs, how important is it to you, and more importantly to your members and future apprenticeships, for C49 to pass and also to have the ITCs come into effect?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, we do build it all, and we do see that renewable energy is necessary for not only climate change, but for us to get ahead of it. I think it's very important in the sense that it will provide us opportunities, but we need to make sure not only through the tax credits that those opportunities really do exist, because a company can do a project and either choose to meet the prevailing wage to get the full tax credit, or choose just to use cheaper labor or not to meet the standards and not get the tax credit. So I want to make sure that we benefit on all ends, and if we can ensure that the work is met by prevailing wage and the Canadians can do it, I think it's a win-win for us. But I am concerned if I see what's happening in the U.S. and seeing how much other work has been done globally on offshore wind, that you'll see lots of offshore work being done by foreign companies with foreign workers from Denmark and Norway, and we'll lose some of that opportunity. And I think, we'll fight for that work and we'll push for it. But I think we just need to have some more safeguards in place to show that we can maximize it.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman, for that answer. Mr. Chair, I'll turn my remaining time to Parliamentary Secretary Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sobrera. I want to thank all the witnesses. I think you've made some very important points as it relates to the bill. First of all, I'm happy to see that you're not opposed to the bill, but I think your concerns are very legitimate, especially in terms of the workers and the ensuring that Canadian workers have the jobs. I agree with Mr. Schuman. And I also agree that any development we do in the ocean needs to have as minimal or no impact on fish stocks as we possibly can. So I guess, I know it's not enough time for everyone to answer the questions, and I do want to acknowledge as well the work of Mr. Nicholson and your contribution to our committee today as well. But I'm going to start with the fisheries piece. So in terms of what we're doing in the offshore right now with oil and gas, for example, how have the relationship been between fisheries organizations in Nova Scotia, or in the case of PEI is appearing here today as well, feel free to jump in, but what has been the relationship between the fishing industry and the offshore oil industry in moving that piece of energy forward? And how is it different in terms of what's being looked at in the offshore wind sector and other renewables? Because if there's duplication of models that work, we want to hear about it. If it's, maybe it wasn't in previous legislation, maybe it's not in this legislation, but maybe it's best practices that have worked. And I'd like to hear about that and how you've been able to get around it. And if there's enough time, I do want to go to Mr. Schuman, because I think it goes without saying that everything we do in energy development has to be done maintaining not just the best environmental protections for fish and other species, but also ensuring maximum employment and opportunities for communities and workers in Canada. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to hear what his suggestions would be around this bill to maximize the incentives and benefits for Canadian workers and communities. And maybe we can start with whoever would like to start, but maybe Mr. Barron, who presented first on the fisheries piece.
Okay, you hear me? Okay. Maybe actually, Chris, you would be more versed to answer the oil and gas piece than I would be. So if you don't mind, I would ask Chris to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this one. We see it's been an evolving relationship between fisheries and oil and gas developers. Really, it's one that has matured over time. I like to think those relationships have been greatly improved as we've had improved communication, fisheries observers being aboard for oil and gas work that's been ongoing. In many respects, we've gone past that point of time of just being obstructionist. It is a shared marine environment, and it's about finding the solutions that work for both sides. I'll take a pause because I can see the red. Thank you.
Thank you. Time is up for this round. As mentioned earlier, if you'd like to answer that, you can put it in a brief and provide that information. But I will move to the next speaker, which is Monsieur Simard, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Mousseau, I'd like to go back to what you said during your presentation, when you mentioned the inconsistencies and the fact that projects are being put on equal footing, the renewable energy projects and the oil and gas projects. I think that is quite important for our analysts to note that, because it's the answer that Minister Regan gave us last week when he came. It doesn't seem to be that the government really wants to make a distinction between the two. But it's essential to do so if we want to really clearly look at energy transition. But this is a political issue, Mr. Mousseau, so I'm not going to get into that. But I'm going to look at the second part of your presentation, because you have a surprising ability to really thwart some of the enthusiasm of certain politicians with regard to the energy sector, even though they may not know all of the ins and outs of it. If we look at the wind energy projects, for example, the production of hydrogen from clean energy, we have to have a certain type of process that may not exist yet. So the government may want to produce hydrogen in this way, but do you think this is possible in the short or medium term? Thank you very much for the question. We can't do so right now. In fact, we don't have any boats that can transport hydrogen across the ocean. And that is why I'd like to echo what Peter Nicholson just said. The issue is really how we are going to transport electricity to land and how it's going to be distributed to the market in a classic or traditional manner with cables. I see wind projects being developed in Quebec, especially in my region, Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. There is already expertise, there are dams, there's already infrastructure. So it seems to me that they're already sufficiently advanced because they have all of that infrastructure. Quebec has that. With regard to the infrastructure that required to build cables and different lines to transport energy, there are costs associated with that. How much would those costs be in kilowatt hours, for example? Well, it depends on the distance as well. So in that regard, perhaps Peter Nicholson has studied that a little bit more in his article with the use of wind turbines. But with regard to transporting fossil energy, if you look at Hydro-Quebec's lines, there are some that go across thousands of kilometers, and they can distribute from the major plants to other centers. Take the example of Churchill. The energy from that can be transported to the Montreal market. The issue is the availability of winds offshore, and those would reduce the requirement for stocking. So that could balance out the offshore production. But that involves a traditional electric system even once the energy is produced offshore. So if those projects are going to go ahead in Eastern Canada, these green energy products, the markets aren't yet there. The infrastructure isn't there. So there are all sorts of issues that have to be addressed if you're going to have projects over the next 25 years. You have to have some economic plans in place as well. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. So at the end of the day, the federal government, with its current strategy, will have some tax credits for clean energy and for clean hydrogen. So if you're going to try to attract investors to invest in those sectors, that's what's in place now. But in your view, with those advantages, do you think it's possible to attract someone who would want to develop an offshore wind project, or do you think we're already very far away from such projects going ahead? Well, I think that if you're going to add offshore hydrogen production, that's quite an important step. We have some extremely ambitious climate objectives. You're going to have to test things and set up some industries that may fail, but they might succeed. So even if there are risks involved and if there is uncertainty, you have to move forward. You can't just add up the uncertainties, compound the uncertainties for projects. If you have to understand that we have to just proceed if you're going to accelerate the transition. We have to have some models to really clearly see what's going to happen. Yes, I see blue hydrogen products, green ones. Do you think there are any models for those type of projects that exist right now in Canada? Yes, there are some models, but the question is how we're going to get the hydrogen into service. But when it comes to production, we have an idea of how much it's going to cost. Like at the Trottier Institute, you can get such data.
I'll go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to thank all the witnesses for the excellent testimony. In my 20 years in Parliament, I've never seen perfect legislation. This is why witnesses are so important. Your point of view matters, so that we can actually make sure that the legislation does what it's supposed to do. And to that, Mr. Viscato, I'd like to start with you. You know, my mother's a McNeil. They came from Cape Breton to work the mines in Northern Ontario. But I'll admit the only fish I ever caught was a six-pack going over to Buddy's house after he'd spent all day out on the lake. So fisheries is not my area of expertise. But I know that you've said that your colleagues, you've just been invited to this, but are you able to provide us with language on issues of consultation, compensation that may be necessary to put into the bill? Because my understanding was that these were issues that were dealt with the offshore petroleum boards, but if there's something that needs in the federal legislation, would you look at language where you think it would be important that you could bring to us? You could call my office and we could work with you on it. That, to me, is how we improve bills. Is that a possibility?
Thank you for the question. And to be honest, I've eaten an awful lot of walleye from your writing. Yes, we can start looking at working on some of that compensation language. I mean, there's a lot of models that are out there. You have models that are related to saying, okay, what if we develop a fund in case something happens, right? So there is opportunities to look at those pieces. I'll commit to doing some work on the side and reaching out to you. Thank you again.
And we will reach out to you because it's really important. We don't want to have a new industry come up and affect either the environment or the people who are working. Mr. Schuman, I'm going to turn to you. I was just in Edmonton, and every time I go to Edmonton, I seem to meet the operating engineers. You guys are everywhere. And we have a conversation about the importance of Canadian workers and union jobs in this transition. And we saw that Joe Biden went to COP26. He said he was going to create a new economy based on good paying union jobs. We haven't quite heard that language from our Prime Minister. But in the last 3 years, $500 billion of investment have moved from the IRA through their tax credits, 170,000 jobs. We're still sort of trying to figure out things. We're still talking about it. What are we missing out on in terms of what you're seeing with your colleagues in the United States and those projects that are getting up and they're moving ahead?
Good question. Rarely do I say I'm jealous of our neighbors south of us, but in this case I am. President Biden has really put the metal to the pedal. He has been true to his word, and he's acted, and they have acted, and I will say that the unionized construction work has reaped the benefits, and we are busier now than we have been for decades. And so we're very happy how they pushed it forward, and it's the plan on the tax credits, putting action to word. I think in Canada we get bogged down. We take very long on to get some things through, and it's sort of sometimes half-hearted. Like with the ITCs, they're very beneficial, but we had conversation with the officials. We asked for more. They gave us what they gave us. Part of the thing is they don't understand labor. The finance didn't understand it and was somewhat reluctant. When we deal with some other officials, they get the need for offshore wind. They get the need for development. They don't understand the need of the labor component. They make sure that Canadians actually benefit from the work as well. And I don't know where the disconnect is, but there seems to be a disconnect sometimes. And I don't know if it's our system, what it is, but yeah, there is something missing here, and we should actually look to the U.S. for once on this. They've gotten it right.
I mean, the ITCs are supposed to give us both prevailing wage and apprenticeships, which I'll admit for the Liberals, that was a heck of a step for them to even mention apprenticeships. But what we don't want are loopholes so that workers are being brought in from other jurisdictions to take our jobs. So are there steps that we need to take to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Let's be clear, corporations, companies will always find loopholes. Talking about Bill C-49 with the government, they've told us that in the principal component of this bill, and in industrial benefits, we should be covered. Principles mean nothing. If you look at the benefits plan, it will say companies will be given first consideration for supply. Nova Scotians and Newfoundlands will be given their first consideration. First consideration doesn't mean a guarantee. If you look at principles, I'm pretty sure Stellantis was all good about the principles. Foreign workers got in. If you look at the offshore stuff, remember, on offshore wind, there's two components. The stuff that's going to be built onshore and the stuff that happens offshore. Offshore is all done by ships, big, massive ships that we have none of. They'll come from Europe, other places. They'll come with foreign crews. They'll use loopholes to make sure their workers work. The European trade agreement will allow them to allow specialized workers to work on these ships. And they can argue it'll be specialized because we've never done this work before. So that's our challenge. We need to figure out ways how to close these loopholes, and there might be many.
Well, we saw in Aberdeen, they turned that port city, which was really suffering from the downturn in oil. The construction jobs, the transportation jobs, the shipping jobs, they were able to do it. Your members, are we set to be able to take this on? If we say we can take those jobs, that we're able to do it, that we could put the trained workers to make these projects work?
It's a good question. I think we can do a lot of the work. I agree that at the beginning, I think there'll be some technical workers that will have to come from abroad, but can we train our workers to do that work? Yes. And we've done it in other projects. The LRT, if I understood rightly, the boring machine, we in fact had an agreement where they were allowed to have a foreign worker on it, but we got trained on it, right? So I think there's opportunities, maybe not at the front end. And if you look at the agreement in the U.S., that's what it is. It's 25% on the ships. It increases every year to ensure that you get that training and to build that workforce.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Colleagues, we have a few minutes, and I will propose that we have one last 1-minute round each for all parties, starting with the Conservatives, if everybody's fine with that, so we can get a few more questions in for a large panel today. 1 minute each. Everybody looks in agreement. Very good. I will start with the Conservative Party with Mr. Falk. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses here. You've provided some excellent testimony. Several of you commented on the fact that you feel this bill has been very rushed, and you indicated you had 5 days' notice. You know, last week we heard from 2 ministers at this committee, and both of the ministers indicated that the fishing industry was very important, and they wanted to hear the voice of the fish harvesters. Is what Minister Wilkinson indicated. Minister O'Regan said that there had been consultation within the fisheries and ocean sectors in the provinces, as well as Liberal member Yvonne Jones indicated that she also was aware that broad consultation had taken place with fisheries and oceans, and that she is very supportive of the fishing industry. Is that how you fishermen feel?
And I'll just say on a quick response. Go ahead. Response, Mr. McPherson, I think you... Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, well, just quickly that, thank you for that. Our consultation to date, and I can appreciate we're not maybe directly involved with this just yet, but these could be located anywhere. DFO, 2 calls with DFO. We reached out to Marine Renewables and had several calls with them to try to find out more background information. And there was one open house held in Charlottetown by the Offshore Wind Development Advisory Board. So that is it to date. On what we've received on Prince Edward Island, and we're seeking more avenues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McPherson. We'll now go to Ms. Jones for a minute. Please go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Sorry. Thank you. My last question, I guess, is going to be to Mr. Schuman. So in the bill under section 96.6, which is a new clause that they added, when we did briefings with officials and around the legislation, they were before our committee as well. They indicated that under this particular clause would be an opportunity for you to define, I guess, how the workforce would transpire, how you could ensure that it's more Canadian-based and that we're not bringing foreign workers and so on. Have you had those discussions with officials, and is it a real opportunity under that clause for you guys to do something around that area?
We haven't had any discussion with officials. We've had some brief conversation with the minister's office. I think if there's a will, there's a way. And we're always willing to work with anyone who wants to work with us to find solutions. So we'll be happy more to sit with officials to see how we can put proper wording in there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for a minute.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Mousseau. The offshore wind projects will represent huge costs. And if you look at the Strathfalls disaster, there were cost overruns of $13 million, or $13 billion, I should say. Do provinces like Newfoundland have the nerve to go ahead with such huge projects? When it comes to financing, is it going to take a huge amount of money from the federal government to go ahead? Well, it will depend on the cost of electricity. Usually there'll be a call for tender to see how much people are ready to pay. Offshore electricity is often more expensive than on land wind energy, so it really depends on the demand. It will be private firms with the experience who are going to set up these wind farms. There are major technical challenges that are required, and we'll have to train some Canadians, but there are people who have experience and who have set up such wind farms elsewhere who are going to be in charge of these projects.
Mr. Angus, to finish this off for a minute.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your excellent work as our Chair. Mr. Nicholson, I'm sorry we didn't get to you earlier because so much of what you've said is so interesting. I would have thought just a few years ago that offshore wind was a hypothetical. Could it work? Could it not work? And yet we see these projects that are happening in the United States, the New Jersey projects that will power 700,000 homes, the one off Martha's Vineyard, 450,000 homes. Rhode Island, 200,000 homes. These are staggering amounts of clean energy. Is this, where are we in the cusp of this transformative revolution? What's it going to mean for low cost, for clean energy, and for being able to transform our economy?
Well, clearly the advance so far in this field has been largely concentrated in Europe, around the North Sea, and in China. And there's extensive experience there, and they've already installed amounts that are far beyond the discussions that we've been having here. And the plans in Europe in particular are to employ about 300 new gigawatts of electrical energy over the next 10, 15, 20 years. So look, the bottom line is this is an opportunity of historic proportions. And if this country is really serious about its net zero objectives, and I know we are and we have to be, I cannot see this country meeting that without some very extensive development of offshore wind energy. The figures put forward in the Canada Energy Regulator scenarios virtually state that. I mean, the amounts of wind are quoted without saying precisely whether they're onshore or offshore, but the greatest opportunity clearly is offshore. And it's just a question of the detailed economics, the extent to which that will fulfill Canada's need.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of today's meeting. But before I leave, I want to thank all our witnesses providing testimony. If there's something you missed or would like to provide a brief, please do so by 5 p.m. on February the 16th. Thank you once again. This concludes our meeting for today. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes, meeting adjourned. Have a great day.
Thank you.